Welcome, everybody. This is the Rotary eClub of Silicon Valley. Thank you for joining us. We are part of Rotary International, 1.2 million people around the world in 36,000 clubs. Doing what? Glad you asked. Service above self. And the idea is that as clubs, as groups of people who care about their communities, we do projects, small, large, to help folks locally, globally, and digitally. And so our goal is, as part of this club, to bring you a little inspiration every week that allows you to think, hey, I can make a difference as well. So we look for interesting speakers, folks who can tell us about the cutting edge of anything. And today, our speaker is one of our own, one of our members from the eClub of Silicon Valley. His name is Maxi Bustos. You read his introduction coming in. He was with Google for a long time. He is now the CTO of Futureswap, which you're going to hear a little bit about, and about the nature of Web 3.0. So we'll be touching on crypto and blockchain and all of those kinds of things. That pretty fun topic. So Maxi, with that, I hand it over to you. Thank you for giving us some of your time to talk to us about this.
Thank you, Rushton. I'm so happy to be speaking to our club today. For those of you who don't know me, I have been a member of our club for almost 5 years, since 2017. I'm part of the Rotary family for almost 16 years. I started an Interact back in La Rioja, Argentina, my hometown, and then Rotaract in Cordoba, where I attended college. And in this presentation, I'll be speaking about Web3, blockchain, cryptocurrencies. These are topics I am very passionate about. I've been learning about them. I'm still learning. I left Google a year ago to spend my time full-time working and exploring this new world. And as CTO of Futureswap, we're building really exciting technologies that we believe will have an impact on society. So let me get started and give you an overview. Hopefully 10, 11 minutes will be enough. So let's start with a bit of history. So in 1989, Tim Berners-Lee, who was a physicist at CERN, he invented the World Wide Web, which was built on top of the internet, which predated the web by almost 2 decades. And this version of the web, which is usually known as Web 1.0, was characterized by websites that were mostly static. And most of the users were consumers of content, not producers. And some people call this the read-only internet. This is the era where we saw the birth of web browsers like Netscape or Internet Explorer, search engines that allow us to navigate this vast amount of content like Yahoo and Google. This first era of internet, of course, had a lot of impact in the society because everyone with an internet connection suddenly got access to a vast world of information. Then we have a next generation of web, usually known as Web 2.0. It started in the early 2000s. And in these eras, users were not only consuming content, but also producing it. We saw the emergence of highly interactive internet web applications and also mobile applications. And it had profound changes in the way we interact with our friends through social network, the way we get work done using productivity applications, the way we learn using e-learning platforms or YouTube, the way we shop using e-commerce websites, the way we share information, etc., etc. This is the internet that we know today, and we are all users of it. But this is all great. And today I can send a message to a friend across the globe in a few hundred milliseconds. But if I want to send money to a friend, that transaction can take several days to settle. I have to pay often very high fees. And this is one of the problems that Web 2 hasn't solved yet. It's not very effective to transfer value across the internet. And you often have to trust a centralized third party to deliver this money for you. And why is that? Because there is a problem called the double spending problem, where if I have to send money, and let's say I send $10 to Rushton, Rushton need to make sure that those $10 that I sent him, I'm not going to send them to someone else. And this is often called as the double spending problem. And the way that Web 2 solves this problem is by putting a third party that ensures that that money is not going to be spent twice. And this is core because in 2009, Satoshi Nakamoto published a paper for a peer-to-peer version of electronic cash. We, up to until today, we don't know who Satoshi is. It can be a person, a group of persons, aliens. We'll never know probably. In this paper, he presented an innovation that allows online payments to be sent directly from one peer to another peer without going through a trusted party and without requiring a third party to prevent this double spending problem. So in the paper, they figure out the solution for this using a peer-to-peer network, distributed consensus, blockchain, and cryptography. A lot of strange words, but we'll get into some of those as we go. And this was the birth of Bitcoin, which many of you have probably heard about. So let's get a bit more into how this works. So what is a blockchain? And you can see in the image here, and as the name is saying, is a blockchain is a chain of blocks. Each block has information. For example, in the case of Bitcoin, it contains information about transactions like Maxi sent $10 to Rushton, and each block is connected to the predecessor block, and they're cryptographically signed. And I'm not going to get into the details of how that works. That will take probably a year of learning. But what you have to believe me is that once a block is created and signed, it's very, very hard for a single individual to go and change the information in that block. And this is a really nice property, in particular for a payment system, because if I send money, Russian needs to have the insurance that I'm not going to be able to revert that and say, hey, I pay you and now I revert the payment. These blocks are produced by nodes that are part of a distributed network. Anyone can join this network. Anyone with a computer can download a piece of software and join this network. And these nodes, using an algorithm for distributed consensus, agree on what the information of the block is, and they put these blocks into the chain. And for doing this work, these nodes are rewarded. And in the case of the Bitcoin blockchain, they're rewarded using Bitcoin. The innovation in this area, remember, Bitcoin was 2009, it continued because the thing is, Bitcoin was great, but it didn't have much flexibility in terms of what you can do with that blockchain. Definitely not enough to build financial applications or even build a financial system. All you can do is send money from A to B, right? So innovation continued, and a few years later, in 2014, a 19-year-old Canadian computer scientist called Vitalik Buterin, he published a white paper describing what he called Ethereum. Ethereum you can imagine as a world distributed computer in which each node of this distributed network has the state of these computers, and users can send instructions, and these nodes will compute the new state of this computer. Ethereum has a programming language in which you can create what is called smart contracts. You probably have heard this word being used all over the place. And what are these smart contracts? They're just pieces of software that run into this blockchain and that do some computation. And you can build many, many different things using these smart contracts, in particular, decentralized financial applications. So people actually started picking up on this idea of building decentralized financial applications. And around 2009, 2019, 2020, we saw the birth of DeFi, or decentralized finance. And we saw the creation of apps that allowed you to lend your cryptocurrencies or borrow cryptocurrencies. We saw decentralized exchanges, derivatives exchanges, margin trading, insurance, stable coins, which, as you might know, cryptocurrencies are usually very volatile, but they created coins that are pegged to the US dollars, oracles that give you information about the outside world, like the price of a particular asset, or whether I don't know, a team won a championship, for example. So the decentralized finance or DeFi movement was born, and the goal of the more aggressive people in this space is to revolutionize the financial system, make it decentralized, make it globally connected, make it permissionless so everyone can participate, transparent so that everyone can see what is happening. And today you can see on these decentralized protocols, you can see every single transaction that is going through it, and censorship resistant. No one has the control of the protocol and no one can decide who can use it. This idea has been growing at a very rapid pace. And these days we have hundreds of billions of dollars in transactions every single day. So let's continue with the story. We talk about Web3, Web 2, and we can consider Web 2 as the internet of information. And Web 3 is the internet of value, is the decentralized internet. It's based on these blockchain technologies. And it is decentralized because we take back the power to users. Users are now active participants of these protocols, either by running nodes or by participating on the communities that are building these protocols, these smart contracts. They can vote on decisions on how these things are built through smart contracts that are specialized on governance and voting. The Web3 is also permissionless. Everyone can participate. It's trustless. You don't need to trust a third party. You just need to trust the code that is deployed in these smart contracts. And this is not only about decentralized finance. I just chose decentralized finance as a way to explain it, but this is also affecting other industries like gaming, supply chain, collectibles, arts. Have you heard about NFTs? That's another buzzword that has been around since the last year, among other things and other areas that we haven't even discovered. So why does this matter? So I think no one really knows what the real future of Web3 will look like. And in some areas, we can't even agree within the people in the industry what the right definition of Web3 is. And in some areas, it's used just as a hype mechanism to increase values of companies. But I do personally believe that this technology is here to stay in one form or another, and that it will have profound changes in our societies. In particular, decentralized finance, I think, has the potential to reshape how money is flowing and to facilitate the access of millions of people who today are excluded from the financial system. And I think it's important for each of us, or professionals, we're innovators, we're people of service, to understand these technologies, even if you might be skeptical of the real impact that they will have. And for this talk, I also want to talk a bit more about Rotary and the connection with Web3. I think we can all agree that Rotary was a bit late on getting into the Web 2.0 era. It took us years to have a strong social media presence. It took us years to have a decent website. And I think, like, in the last few years, Rotary has certainly been doing a really good job. It took us years to embrace technologies for our meetings, not the case of our club, but it sometimes feels that it took a pandemic for people to understand that you could do online meetings. And I think Web3 could be an opportunity for Rotary to actually keep up on the innovation, this time take it early days, and figure out how these technologies can be used in the service of others. And imagine that you could do a fundraising using the blockchain. This happened a few months ago. I think about $50 million were raised to help people in Ukraine, all through the blockchain. We could do fundraisers by selling what now we call the virtual art, or NFT. Or imagine if you could donate cryptocurrencies instead of US dollars to the Rotary Foundation. I would certainly be very happy, and I have a lot of friends who be able to contribute. And imagine instead of getting a Paul Harris pin, you got an NFT that then you can show in your NFT collection. Imagine if we connected these to these new ideas of metaverse, and you have a Rotary Club of the metaverse. So I certainly don't have the answers to many of these questions, but my vision is quite optimistic. I'm spending most of my professional time in this space, and I think we as a club are very well positioned to discover what could we do with Web3 and with this innovation. I think it will be very unfortunate that if with all the innovation that is happening in this space, that we wouldn't figure out ways to make use of it to better serve others. So here I am in this new and exciting area of decentralization, navigating my way, discovering things. And as I said before, I'm very optimistic that these technologies will reshape our society and that in 5 to 10 years, things will be very different. And I hope that this presentation gave you a quick glance of what is out there. And thank you so much for listening. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Fantastic, Maxi. Thank you so much for the presentation. I know we're going to have a set of questions ready to go. So I ask our audience to kind of be thinking about that piece right there. As we do, I want to take a little bit of time to introduce the people that we have on the call. So Maxi, if you'll stop screen sharing for a minute, we'll take a look at our group, and I'll ask everyone in the group to wave when I call your name. So Maxi, go ahead and stop screen sharing there, and what we'll do is we'll take a look via the gallery view, and I can kind of run through that. So we have a number of guests with us. Welcome, at least 3 of whom are in or normally in Cologne in Germany. First, Dimitar, hello. Thank you very much for being with us. And thank you for all the work you did on the eRILA program just in early March. Sarah, also from Cologne, thank you for joining us. Marvin in Cologne, or in Berlin, actually at the moment, but normally in Cologne. Tanya in Atlanta, a longtime friend of the club. All right, welcome.
Hello.
Good to have you. All right, and then we have a set of members as well. So in addition to Maxi, my name is Rushton. I am the programs chair for our club. Our secretary, Nick Lagarde, who is our Canada representative up in British Columbia. We have Angelica, our president-elect, who is in Italy. We have Phil Dean, who is in the East Bay here in the San Francisco Bay Area. Welcome to you. Another one of our members in Germany, Jens. So thank you for the good work you've done in connecting us with a number of speakers recently as well. Martina, who is originally from around Munich, but now in Spain and part of the team that did the eRILA program. And then also here in California, but with a residence in Italy and raring to get back is Cecilia Babkirk, our treasurer. So Cecilia, thank you for being here. Everyone, let's get the questions started with this. So if you have a question, just let me know in the chat so that I can kind of get this set up as we go. So first question, Maxi, for you is one really just about about the idea of value in the blockchain as well. So for a lot of people, I think, and me included, there is some confusion around the idea of like, all right, if I am trading currencies and I want Canadian dollars, I have American dollars to start with. And so there is a set number of Canadian dollars out there that I might be able to purchase, in order to buy, Putin or whatever it is I decide I'm going to do with these things. But the Canadian government is in charge of essentially regulating how many Canadian dollars are out there. What a lot of people don't understand, and maybe this is just one of those things that can't be explained in a short time, but how do we determine how many Bitcoin or Dogecoin or however might be out there? Is that something that you can help us with?
Yes. So the way it works is there is code out there that is open source that determines the algorithm or the mechanism by which new Bitcoin will be printed. And everyone out there knows, okay, there is this maximum amount of Bitcoin and it's going to be printed at this rate. And that can't change without catastrophic consequences, like you have to fork the complete network and create a new Bitcoin, right? So when you get into Bitcoin, you understand from the beginning what are the rules of the game, and changing those rules is super, super complicated. Similar to other cryptocurrencies, like, I mean, there are thousands of them. The definition of what is the maximum supply of a particular coin is usually encoded in a smart contract. How it will be minted is also encoded. And people have the power to vote to change some of these parameters, but it requires consensus of the communities. I think one of the advantages is that, again, you have to trust the code, and some people will claim trusting code is better than trusting people, but that's a separate discussion. To answer your question, yes, there is a way to know it, and it's out there. You might need to be technologically savvy to understand, but you can also have someone understand it for you and then publish a nicer explanation, and you trust that that person is explaining you this topic correctly.
So in the same way that people might assume that the US dollar is a worthy currency to work with, essentially the community is assuming that Bitcoin is a worthy cryptocurrency to work with, and therefore gets used and therefore has value. Is that accurate?
Yes, I think that's accurate. I mean, look, there are cryptocurrencies that are today pegged to the US dollar, right? There are stable coins that you hold one, it's called USDC or USDT. There are different ones, and they're backed one-to-one to the US dollar. And those exist. So you could hold those and use those in the blockchain. And then there are others like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and thousands of others, in which the value depends on a lot of factors. There is, of course, a speculation. But at the end of the day, if you can use your Bitcoin to pay for something, and these days, no one is really using Bitcoin to go pay for a pizza. There was this guy in 2010 who paid for a pizza using Bitcoin, and that's like a $150 million pizza to the value of Bitcoin today. So no one is using Bitcoin as a source of, as a medium of payment anymore, more like as a store of value. There are more efficient blockchains today to use as payment, but if you have a merchant that is receiving that as a form of payment, then, well, that's a good property for a currency to have.
So Jens noted that his alpaca socks are worth $490 million today, or effectively given what he paid. Hang in there, Jens. So Angelica had a question, and then Martina, and then we'll get to Nick. So Angelica is actually interested in how you became interested in this field. So, I mean, this is very interesting stuff, but you're working at Google. You've got a perfectly good job there. This prompted you to make a professional shift. How did you become interested?
Yes, I think that's a really good question. So my work at Google was in the productivity and communications space. I was working for Gmail, for chat. It was exciting times because with the pandemic, more people were actually using these technologies, and we became very even more popular. But I started looking out of curiosity at decentralized finance, and I thought that if there is going to be the big next wave of innovation, it had to be in finance. I had a bunch of discussions here in the Silicon Valley with people that I respect a lot. Some of them are working on fintech, some of them are working on crypto. And they told me, look, a lot of the problems around data and information are mostly solved, but there's this big area where we haven't innovated really. Like the way banks work today is not very efficient, and there hasn't been that much innovation in that space. So then it was the question of, do you go to fintech startups or do you go to crypto? And definitely there are a lot of fintech startups that are doing amazing work. And I even interviewed with some of them, but I felt that in crypto, there was an opportunity to be a lot more disruptive. Of course, there is more risk. So definitely for me, it was a leaving comfort zone and going to the risky crypto startup. But I'm honestly very excited about all the things that I'm learning and all the changes that have been happening for the last year and a half.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
Yeah, Martina, why don't you ask your question?
Out of fairness, Nick was first.
I'm curious more around the evolution of it, because like Bitcoin, because it's to your point, I think you said it's more efficient, or other ones are more efficient, so it's a store of value now. How do you see that Web3 getting more efficient? Because it's one of those things that is, for me, I hear a lot about especially in the US, there's these cities that are trying to jump on the bandwagon, basically. But there's obviously a tremendous environmental impact. Do you see it getting more efficient?
Yes, in fact, there was this comparison where if you take the energy consumption of Bitcoin in terms of size, you could get Burj Khalifa, that tall building, and then Ethereum with the new version of Ethereum that is launching later this year, hopefully, you get to something that is like 5 meters or something like that. That's the comparison. And then on top of that, there are layer 2 solutions that are called that basically process transactions and then put them on chain in a decentralized way as well. And that will be the size of a nail like this. So there is definitely exponential improvements because I think Bitcoin was a really nice experiment, but the environmental effects are there and are true. But this is technology. I think we tackle one problem at a time. I think Bitcoin was a really good proof of concept of what could be achieved, and it created this revolution that we're discovering problems and tackling one problem at a time. And definitely this one is one of them. No one wants to be damaging the environment while building a financial system. So there has been a lot of innovation in the space. And I think in the next few years, this will be a solved problem.
Martina, go ahead.
Thank you. What I was always asking myself is how is cryptocurrency mined? This is something that I never understood. How do you mine Bitcoins? Because I heard that it takes up a lot of energy. You need a lot of electricity. So I was really asking myself, how does this work?
Yeah, so when I mentioned briefly about consensus mechanisms, and consensus mechanisms are the way in which a lot of nodes in a network agree that certain transaction happen or that the block has certain information. And Bitcoin uses a consensus mechanism called proof of work, in which you have to prove that you did some work. And that work is a very, very expensive mathematical operation. And for that mathematical operation, you need a lot of compute power. In fact, these days, no one is mining Bitcoin with their computers. You have factories, like huge data center with thousands and thousands of computers like trying to solve these mathematical operations as quickly as possible. And that takes a lot of energy. And that's where the energy consumption comes from, right? Mining a Bitcoin is getting to finish the explanation, then when you solve this operation, you get rewarded Bitcoins. And that's how you mine Bitcoins. And people are competing to mine as quickly as possible because with that, they get the Bitcoins, right? The problem is that, again, this takes a lot of electricity and that has the impact in the environment. So there are these new ways of distributed consensus called proof of stake, where you can delegate your vote on the consensus to someone else, and if that person is not honest, they lose money. So they're incentivized by the system to be honest, and there are like different flavors of that, and that's where the industry is moving these days.
Sarah, you have
Thank you.
and after Sarah, we'll get a question from Marvin, and then save our other questions for after our recording. Sarah.
Thank you. Thanks for the remarkable insights first. And I was wondering, you told us at the beginning that Rotary had a long way for like a decent social media presence, and we had trouble with the website. So there was a long way to go. We are there now. But what could be the greatest chance for humanitarian work like Rotary does in order to use the Web 3.0 for like doing good? Is there any chance to use it for it?
I think this is something I've been brainstorming myself. And there are a few projects out there. There's one that is trying to figure out if we could do basic universal income in a country using blockchains, in which the money is distributed not through government officials, but blockchain directly. So that would be an interesting idea. Again, it's a big experiment, and I think it's going to be tricky to pull off, but that will be an example. I know that definitely having traceability of how the money is being spent is a nice property for NGOs. And so if I donate money through a blockchain system, I can then see how that money has been used and have some stamp of like, hey, the money actually went to the place I designated. That will also be really nice, bringing more transparency. I think in terms of fundraising, I mentioned one idea, which is just fundraising through blockchain technologies where it's very easy to send money. And that's something I actually want to try at some point when I get some time. But I think there's still a lot of questions, and definitely in education, there are now these games built on Web3 that rewards users for playing, but you can incorporate an education component there, and you could do service through education, for example. But yeah, I mean, this is like still an area where I'm thinking like every day, like, is there something? And the examples I put just are in the surface of the more trivial things, like of what you could do.
Fantastic. Last question before we finish up the recording from our guest in Berlin, Marvin. As Web 3.0 will be based on blockchain, do you think we will have a consolidation and have just a few, or maybe just one, relevant blockchains in a few years?
That's an interesting one. I think there is room for having multiple of them. And I think it actually will be beneficial to have different blockchains, and some blockchains might be optimized for gaming, some blockchains might be optimized for finance, some blockchains might be optimized for social media. I think what we wouldn't want is to have one on only one player, because that gets us back to some of the problems on Web3, on Web 2, when you have too much centralized power, then it's harder to control, right? So I would expect, and these days there are a lot of blockchains out there. Of course, Bitcoin, Ethereum are the most popular ones, but I do see a world where you have a blockchain of blockchains, or an internet of blockchains, and each of them have different use cases.
Maxi, thank you. This is a topic I am sure we'll be hearing plenty about over the coming weeks, months, and years. And it's great to get some information from one of our own. All of you who are watching this recording as a part of the Rotary eClub of Silicon Valley's weekly meeting, there are a couple of things we ask you to do. One of them is that a little farther down the page, there is a place to register your attendance. There is a short survey, and by filling that out properly, you can get an email to pass along to your club secretary if you're working to make up a miss. While attendance is not generally considered like the end-all be-all to Rotary, we know that loads of people are interested in getting weekly inspiration for how they can be of service to others. At the bottom of the page, you'll find our forum, Discuss, DISQUS, and you can leave messages there for what you thought about this presentation, other aspects of the meeting. You can reply to comments that others are left. It's one of the ways that an online asynchronous Rotary Club gets connection and interaction. So we thank you very much for joining us. And as we always like to do, we hand it to our speaker for the final word. Maxi, the microphone is yours.
Thank you, Rushton, and thank you everyone for the interesting questions. I think my message is, this is really exciting technology, a lot of innovation going on, but I think for people in the space, and especially if you're interested, we need to make sure that all of this innovation actually has an impact to those who are in need and are the less fortunate in our societies, and that it doesn't become another way for people like me in the Silicon Valley with a lot of privilege to be even better off. And that's something that I usually think when I'm working on this thing, is like, are we really making an impact? Are we really affecting those who need the most? And that's the message that I'm hoping to transmit to you, and I usually bring up with my team as well when we're working on these things. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Spoken with the heart of a Rotarian. Everyone, thank you for joining. We will see you next week.